The underdevelopment of the Russian Empire created a tactical political challenge for Lenin's Bolsheviks. They forwarded a revolutionary socialist program based on an industrial proletariat in a country that was overwhelmingly rural and overwhelmingly agricultural. Their progressive cultural orientation, feminist, cosmopolitan, stridently opposed to anti-Semitism and racism, likewise matched poorly in a society that was largely regressive, traditionally feudal, and zealously religious. Orthodox Marxists argued that Russia was not economically ready for revolution. Until World War I, the obstacles to Bolshevik mobilization were indeed insurmountable. It's tempting to think of the reactionary Russian monarchy as being hopelessly out of touch with contemporary politics and statecraft, especially under the hapless mediocrity of Nicholas II. But archaic forms coexisted with some highly effective internal structures, especially in the security apparatus. Tsarist spies and agents infiltrated most radical organizations. In this context, ironically, this included liberal groups. Membership, let alone leadership, could be arbitrarily and summarily punished by imprisonments, exile, or death. Most of the original Bolsheviks, including Lenin himself, spent time in Siberia before fleeing abroad. World War I radically changed political circumstances in the Russian Empire. While relatively capable by international standards, Russian armed forces were outclassed by the modern and hyper-effective German army, leading to major losses of men and territory. The economic needs of total warfare, a novel doctrine in 1914, placed intense stress on the agrarian Russian economy and its semi-feudal state structures, with the pressure only escalating as the war ground on. The general levy of Russian peasants and workers for frontline service created a conducive environment for socialist mobilization, many military units radicalized by their experience of the war, while civilians facing ever-increasing extraction likewise became receptive to radical political solutions. By 1917, the intractable war had fatally undermined the monarchy, leading to the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II and the creation of an elected government dominated by bourgeois liberal forces under Alexander Kerensky. Relying on international support, the new government pledged to keep fighting and increased personal and political freedoms across the Russian Empire. This proved to be a double mistake. War exhaustion had been the major anti-Tsarist grievance, so continuing the war undermined the legitimacy of the new government, while radicals seized on the new political freedoms to mobilize and agitate for revolutionary change. Lenin returned from exile, and the Bolshevik Party, in alliance with other leftist groups, set up a parallel government of workers' councils, or Soviets, to build up their own institutional authority. They openly agitated against the provisional government, and in October 1917 famously deposed it in favor of a communist rule. To legitimize their power, they held new elections open to political parties that had not taken an explicitly anti-Soviet stance, largely other leftists, but also the Liberal Cadet Party. Those electoral results, announced by a Bolshevik revolutionary government and conducted by revolutionaries, demonstrated the limits of communist appeal. Lenin placed second with 23.3% of the vote, going to the Bolshevik Party, behind Viktor Chernov of the Socialists Revolutionaries, 37.6%. The results reflected, first and foremost, the economic geography of Russia. The Bolsheviks won overwhelmingly in urban areas, but those comprised a small share of the population, while the rural-focused SRs won overwhelmingly in the countryside. And this was after unreconcilable political forces, monarchists, vote capitalists, religious conservatives, had already been disqualified. The leader of the revolution couldn't even muster a majority of the revolutionaries. Worse, the political weakness came to light just as those irreconcilable forces mustered for violent counter-revolution. Lenin needed to lock in broad, cross-social popular support for the USSR, lest it give way like Kerensky's regime. To do so, he formalized three proposals derived from Bolshevik principles to slogan-ready pledges designed to win over or neutralize key social groups, broadening the base of Bolshevik support from urban workers to a coalition of oppressed and discontented forces. First, Lenin promised to recognize the independence of any national group that sought to leave the Russian Empire. Russia in 1917 was much larger than the modern state, including a number of now independent states in Eastern Europe, the Baltic region, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. Tsarist Russia conquered these regions and ruled over non-Russians by force, supplanting native political institutions and imposing a foreign culture and law. Some areas, notably Poland and the Caucasus, were prone to periodic uprisings to throw off Russian rule, and many hosted independence movements, some with leftist goals. By offering peaceful secession to these groups who wanted it, Lenin neutralized the threat of secession by force and foreclosed possible collaboration between separatists and counter-revolutionaries who sought to keep the empire intact. Second, the Bolsheviks promised peace with Germany and an end to Russia's participation in World War I. The war was extremely unpopular, with insistence on continued fighting one major factor in the fall of the provisional government. Russians had little hope of victory and understood it wouldn't benefit them even if it were achieved. Most rank-and-file soldiers were fiercely opposed to it and backed the Bolsheviks for this pledge alone, while war weariness among civilians was also a major force. This promise helped secure much of the military for the revolution, which was essential as the USSR entered into an open conflict with counter-revolutionary forces led by Tsarist generals. Finally, Lenin promised land to the peasantry, which made up the majority of the population, and supported the socialists' revolutionaries based on their own pledge for land reform. While the Russian Empire abolished serfdom in 1861, it did so with compensation for landowners, primarily aristocrats in the Russian Orthodox Church, taking the form of payments owed by the newly emancipated peasants to their former masters. This amounted to a new form of rural exploitation, which also continued through the rents that large landholders could extract from tenant farmers. Russian peasants had long dreamed of controlling the land they worked, cherishing a quasi-mystical prophecy of a black root partition, which would divide up church and noble land among the people that worked it. Lenin promised to fulfill that prophecy. The countryside rewarded the Bolsheviks with loyalty to the revolution. These three promises, freedom for the nationalities, peace with Germany, and land for the peasants, together with the Bolshevik program for economic liberation, allowed Lenin to grow his support from an urban worker base into a broad majoritarian force at precisely the moment he needed it the most. As a result, the Bolsheviks would enter the Russian Civil War from a position of strength, enabling them to survive the onslaught of both counter-revolution and foreign intervention.
Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out. You can catch the live stream of This is Revolution every Tuesday through Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific Time and Saturday, 9 a.m. Pacific Time. This is Revolution.